Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Using Data and Analytics to Identify Prolific Violent Offenders, Lessons Learned from the Cuyahoga County, Ohio Prosecutor's Office's Crime Strategies Unit. Today's program is presented by Equitas and Dr. Rachel Lovell and Ryan Bokoch. My name is Beth McGarry, and I am representing B. McGarry and Associates, and I'm also a consultant with Equitas, and I will be moderating today's webinar. If you have a question or a comment during the presentation, please enter it in the chat box or the question and answer box. We will answer questions periodically throughout the webinar, and you're also welcome to contact us directly at any time following today's presentation, and we will send you contact information in the follow-up. Equitas's mission is to improve the quality of justice in sexual violence, intimate partner violence, stalking, and human trafficking cases by developing, evaluating, and refining prosecution practices that increase victim safety and offender accountability. The project you will be hearing about on today's webinar is part of the Smart Prosecution Innovative Prosecution Solutions Initiative. This initiative supports state, local, and tribal jurisdictions across the United States as they implement unique solutions to combat violent crime and build safer communities. Today's webinar is supported by the U.S. Department of Justice, Bureau of Justice Assistance, and the information presented in this webinar does not necessarily reflect the views of BJA. Presenting on today's webinar are Dr. Rachel Lovell and Ryan Bokoch. Dr. Rachel Lovell is an assistant professor of criminology and the director of Criminology Research Center at Levin College of Public Affairs and Education at Cleveland State University in Cleveland, Ohio. She is a victimologist and methodologist who primarily conducts applied research and evaluation, working with criminal justice practitioners, community-based organizations and foundations, and public and social service systems to examine violent crime and gender-based violence, including sexual assault, human trafficking, and intimate partner violence. She is an established scholar with nearly $7 million in external funding since 2013, numerous peer-reviewed publications and chapters, and the lead editor on a recently published monograph, Sexual Assault Kits and Reforming Response in Rape, with Routledge Press. Ryan Bokoch began his career as an assistant prosecuting attorney with the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office in 2006. He is the supervisor of the Crime Strategies Unit, which focuses on prosecuting violent crime and organized crime in Cleveland and Northeast Ohio. He has tried over 75 cases throughout his career, including felonious assault, shootings, murders, and cases involving Ohio's RICO statute. He manages both the FY 2020 Innovative Prosecution Solutions Grant and the FY 2021 Local Law Enforcement Crime Gun Intelligence Center grant. I will now turn it over to Rachel and Ryan.
Thanks, Beth. As Beth mentioned, this was what we'll be talking about today was funded from BJA's Innovative Prosecution Solutions grant, and here's the funding acknowledgement for that. And we also wanted to acknowledge that this was a collaboration between the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office, who was the awardee, the Criminology Research Center at Cleveland State University, which I direct, and the Gun Center at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio as well. Here are the learning objectives today for the webinar that you can read, but the bottom part I think is just as a way of really just writing it or speaking it a little bit more in a way that is less formal, which is that hopefully we wanted to just help you get started, or at least thinking about how you could leverage the data that you have or that you could have for data-driven prioritization of cases. If you're a prosecutor's office or work at a prosecutor's office, or if you work with individuals who are involved in the criminal justice system, the same process would apply in terms of the metrics or the measures could be used, but with a different outcome or purpose, maybe not prioritization for prosecution, but for other reasons, you could still use the sort of general metrics for this as well. So now I'll turn it over to Ryan to describe more about his unit and what he does.
Thanks, Rachel. So first of all, where is Cuyahoga County? That's Cleveland, Ohio, for the most people. For most people, we started our crime strategies unit in 2015, and everybody that has one of these, I don't know exactly what our audience is right now. Everybody that's formed one has kind of done it a little bit differently based on the landscape that you're kind of looking at and some of the problems that every jurisdiction may encounter. For Cuyahoga County, one of our challenges is that we have over 56, we have 56 municipalities, and if you go to law enforcement agencies, it's over 70 that we can deal with on any given day, or that can bring felony cases to us. So when we were formed, it was really to help coordinate the cases between those agencies. People could be between 4 or 5 different agencies committing a crime spree, and a lot of those agencies didn't know how to communicate with one another. Some of the smaller agencies are kind of intimidated to call Cleveland at times. They don't even know where to start. So that's really where we started. And one of our main things, even though there's 56 agencies, is Cleveland is our largest customer, so to speak. We get the most cases are brought down from Cleveland, including the most of the violent crimes. So we do have access to Cleveland's records management system. And what we do with our group is we have our crime analysts. They go through those and review those every day. We look at shootings, murders, robberies, gun recoveries, as well as stolen vehicles. Those are summarized every day and redistributed back to Cleveland. They don't have summaries of their violent crimes. We host regular meetings where we can have agencies from all over the county show up and talk about any crime trends that they have. And then on specific investigations, we'll call meetings and just have the agencies that are involved down here. It's worked well for us. It's broken down a lot of barriers. The agencies are now a lot of times comfortable contacting each other without going through me, and nothing makes me happier than when I see that.
Sorry.
So this is going to be a little bit Rachel's slide, but we do. So we have all that incident data. It goes into a database that we have. And then we also have a lot of the NIMAN data that we get. As Beth had mentioned, the Crime Gun Intelligence Center grant is hosted by our office right now. And we review all those weekly, all those NIMAN leads with ATF, Cleveland, and some other agencies as well. So that was a lot of the data that we kind of had access to, and that we were able to, with our data sharing agreement, work with Rachel's crew to work on this grant.
When we first started working with the crime strategies unit as the research partner on the FY19 IPS grant, one of the main asks that we had from them as the research partner was they had all of this incident data from primarily Cleveland Police Department. And they were sort of just swimming in mounds of this sort of unstructured data. And from that data, they wanted to be able to identify who were the most prolific offenders in Cuyahoga County, mostly Cleveland. And based upon that, and not based upon their criminal histories, but based upon the data that was already available to them, how to make sense of this unstructured data so that they could identify who were the most prolific offenders. And in this case, the prolific offenders would be those that were committing most of the violent crime in Cleveland. And so we wanted to be able to, as researchers, we needed to make it evidence-based or at least evidence-supported. And we needed to, but remember that they had incident data that, not offense data. So not data that had been, from investigations or where they had already been connected, offenders had already been named or connected to those crimes. This was really just from the incident data. So we by the way, this also sort of very much aligns with the newly released DOJ approved 10 essential actions to reduce community gun violence. And we have a link here to that from the Council for Criminal Justice, who developed those 10 essential actions, and the DOJ has approved that as their sort of moving plan for moving forward to reduce gun violence. And they were primarily focusing IPS from the IPS grant, and the Crime Strategies Unit was primarily focusing on reducing gun violence and firearm-related crimes, violent crime. The S2 was to really focus on key people and key places that were driving the violence. And so not just identifying the people, but really looking at people and places. And so to a researcher ears, that says social network analysis. So we will talk a little bit about basic stuff of what we did there. For their larger purpose here was to triage cases for prosecutions for more effectively and efficiently being able to understand, should these cases be handled within their specialized unit in the Crime Strategies Unit, or should those cases be handled by a general felony unit? In other words, which cases should be given more attention, or which of these offenders are the more prolific ones and therefore should be given more specialized attention or should be part of a larger series of crimes as compared to those that should be within the general felony unit for prosecuting those cases. Ryan, do you want to talk any more there about the larger purpose, or did I describe that in sufficient detail?
I think you described it, but really, from where we started to where we are now here in 2024, really, again, focusing on that gun violence really became the driving force of our unit, more than pattern robberies or anything like that, which we can still do from time to time, but it's gun violence, which is really what we've been focusing on.
Okay, so for those, to make this a little bit more interactive and to not just talk to my computer screen and get a little bit more information, I don't know, and I am also a college professor, so I tried to get a little bit of feedback from the audience about who is in the audience. So if you've never used Menti, I use this in my classes. If you go to menti.com and you put in that code, that 1999-7863, you can get to this survey. I should be able to get there. I can see 2 people have responded, so that's exciting. Means you've gotten there. Or you can use like your phone and scan the QR code there to get there if you hadn't figured. Okay, so we've got an even distribution so far of 3 people who, one says, I don't know, yes and no. Okay, no is pulling ahead. So we'll give a little bit more time for people to respond. I'm kind of surprised that no one has answered to the fourth one, which is always the joke that every prosecutor I think I've ever met has said to me. Oh, there we go. There we go. Someone finally answered that one. Every prosecutor I've ever met is like, oh, I became a prosecutor because I don't like math, or some variation of that joke. Which do you also, Ryan, do you also tell that joke in trial? That like, I don't like math?
Depending on the trial, I'll make any type of joke to pander to the audience. I'm just a simple prosecutor, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay. Good. Okay, so the 25% is a little bit more than so I was just curious to see what different kinds of offices, if you're a prosecuting, if you're a prosecutor's office, or a DA's office, they call them in Ohio, they call them prosecuting offices. I think almost every other state calls them a DA's office. If you're using that, or if if your state has, or your jurisdiction has something like that, to be able to triage cases. Okay.
The DA's office does sound way cooler. I
It
really
does
wish
sound
I
way
wish I could go
cooler.
with that. Unfortunately, I have to tell people I'm a prosecutor, not a DA. What are you going to do? Law and Order really ruined it for us.
Yeah. You're not nearly as cool as Law and Order. Sorry.
All right, is this
I think
my
this
slide? Okay.
Mhm.
So I talked a little bit about this in the first slide. So what we do when we that incident data we get with those summaries, it's primarily from Cleveland. We do have access to the Housing Authority, which is a small percentage of cases, Garfield Heights, and we get some from Maple Heights as well. But those are really a small percentage of the database. It's really the vast majority is Rachel has calculated for us. 94% is Cleveland data. So that's what we're looking at there. I think it's so that's, again, it's assaults. It's actually not burglaries. It's robberies, homicides, shooting offenses, weapons violations. And then we started looking at stolen vehicles as well, just because we saw that those were being tied to other violent crimes. People weren't committing drive-by shootings in their mom's station wagon. They were stealing Kias. So knowing what cars were being stolen was relevant for us in some of the stuff we were doing and to assist law enforcement when they were trying to track down vehicles. We do that every day. Those go out every day, and we get all that data. We automate it from Cleveland. We've updated it since we started this and started working with Rachel's team. It was an Access database, which all the data people out here are laughing or cringing when they hear that. But we do have a SQL server now that stores the data, and it makes it easier to deal with. What we ended up doing, so that's when you're doing all that daily work, is we can do some value added there. Cleveland, for instance, just lists things as robberies, and we're able to subcode those. For instance, as like a commercial robbery, a street robbery, a carjacking, etc. So when we go back later, we can pull those out. A lot of carjackings were just being reported as stolen vehicles, so we would recategorize that as a carjacking as opposed to just a stolen vehicle. And then our analysts also have to go through and clean it, type addresses improperly. Sometimes a suspect may not be listed or whatever, and they go through that and try to enter that in as uniform as possible.
So describe a little bit more about the database that is the source of what we'll be talking about today for our methodology. Again, it's an incident database. Just in this time frame, it did get started in 2016, but it really became fully populated starting in 2017. So it wasn't fully populated for a full year starting in 16. And you can see that there's lots of incidents. It's not all the incidents in Cleveland. It's only those related to certain types of crimes. There's a couple of things here. You can see that these are not necessarily criminal codes associated with like Ohio's criminal statute. So carjacking is not a NIBRS crime. It's not a crime also in Ohio according to a criminal code in Ohio. It's actually a combination of two codes. And so there's, like you can't really be charged with a criminal code for carjacking. So their analysts are actually like combining data in ways that are more meaningful for their purposes, but don't necessarily then correspond with an actual like criminal code according to the Ohio Revised Code, but are more meaningful in our way of sort of thinking about what is actually the crime. So what was the robbery? What was a street robbery? Or, what were they doing? It was a commercial kind of robbery or different types of things.
It's been really helpful for us to have that for working with detectives, because they may be looking at like a series of Dollar Generals that are robbed, and if they just went to their own agency, their agency might just be able to pull all robberies, which is going to include acquaintance robberies, street robberies, which aren't going to be relevant for looking at an MO, and we're able to just pull up commercial robberies or carjackings or whatever they may need. It kind of includes some of that MO information that is relevant when you're looking for a crime trend.
Yeah, and it also adds in a layer of consistency because you have an crime analyst coming through and making sure that that crimes are classified in a consistent way, not necessarily which incident data. One of the issues with it is that it can be classified in a variety of ways depending how the officer decides to list the crime at the beginning, which may not be how it really was or how it could be or what the first one is. So there's a lot of consistency in how these data are classified because there's a consistent way of defining these crimes because he has crime analysts in his unit define them in consistent ways. One thing to know is that like almost all incident data, most of the incident data do not have named suspects associated with them because they're because they're associated with incidents. So I mean, this is a severe limitation when you're trying to understand people and those people are not yet associated with those crimes. And we're just trying to understand offenders and prolific offenders, but we're looking at offenses that aren't yet associated with named suspects. However, that is actually a limitation of almost all criminology or criminal justice data, is that a lot of them don't necessarily have named suspects associated with them yet. So was one of the things we'll be talking about later. So still a little bit, you can see we broke this up into two slides. You can kind of see the more about these types of crimes. The most common type, again, this is not all crimes in Cleveland. This is a selection that his office, codes for and is really looking at firearms. Of course, Cleveland has a significant issue with firearm and violent crime, but still, these are overrepresented in this data because that's the focus of the unit, is really trying to focus on firearm-related crimes. So they're overrepresented here in these data because that's really kind of the focus of the unit.
All right, you can obviously commit a felonious assault in our jurisdiction with, a knife or a robbery with a knife, but when we're just looking at that data, it's going to be mostly firearms.
So for identifying the most prolific offenders, one of the things that we really wanted to do that I think was particularly innovative as part of this was that we were looking at a database of incidents, but we sought to identify individuals. And based upon the criteria of the incident. So instead of looking at what's the criteria of the individuals, what's their criminal history, which is a good indicator, but a flawed indicator. Instead, we were looking at just what kind of incident were they associated with? Like, how violent was that crime, or how risky was the incident that they were associated with, regardless of the other types of past that they might have had or other kinds of incidents they might have been associated with. Like, just these incidents that they were associated with what were the characteristics, and just basing this list off of the crimes that they were associated with in that one incident or multiple incidents. And then what can we learn from just looking at this incident database? I think it's a really overlooked database in the criminal justice system, and certainly within prosecutors' offices isn't really looked at for being able to see crime trends. So we wanted to kind of look to see variations of that. So again, we're looking for individuals, but we're using information from incidents. To do this, we needed, here were sort of our guiding principles to be able to come up with this sort of ranking or standardized data-driven sort of set of criteria for prioritizing individuals for investigations and prosecutions. So the criteria we developed needed to be practical. So here, well, actually, I won't read them to you because you can read. But so for the first one would be, it would need to be something that was already in their database or could be easily merged with their database, or something that they could easily keep up with. So nothing that would require a constant, you know, overhaul of a database or lots of information to come in. It'd be something that they would already kind of readily have access to. It needed to be very manageable because here I already showed you they had like 33,000 incidents. So they needed to take all these incidents and come up with a set of criteria that would give them a very manageable number. And we worked with Ryan's office for quite some time. Would be like, what is a manageable number for you? Like 10,000, 5,000, you know, like we were, you know, 100, you know, like really trying to get at like, you know, like what would be a, you know, what kind of number would we be looking at? Because if it's too large, you really can't prioritize. So it needs to be manageable. But at the same time, it needs to really be comprehensive. So it needs to be able to be something that would be readily available. The information would be in almost all the incidents. Like the information would have been contained in the variables that he already had in the database or could have. We didn't need to go back and collect data from the 33,000 cases that he had already coded. It needed to be already in there or pretty much in there, because he did have brief summaries. We did have to go back to those summaries and figure out ways to extract data from it, but it needed to be almost there. At the same time, though, we needed to have sufficient statistical variation, meaning not all people needed to be in one category, but then also it needed to be related to some of the other categories. So it needed to be correlated with some of the other things, but still have variation in it. So I know early on we kind of looked at like probation tends to do risk assessments, and we looked at being able to pull in that data, but we found out that almost everyone is in the middle category. So that's not very useful in terms of being able to assess risk if everyone is in one category. And then it needs to be something that's sustainable. So something that could be a live scoring system that they could really update their list in real time, and not something that we're asking them to do where they couldn't really maintain this or sustain it. So we developed this set of criteria that is really a proof of concept or a framework that the unit could more readily run queries on for a larger number of crimes, so that here's this sort of set of criteria. Could it work for other sets of crimes or for the crime for individuals moving forward to identify the most prolific offenders in the data that they already have, that they could rank by threat level, so that they could, it wouldn't necessarily put someone on just like a list, but they could see maybe, you know, a rank, like a threat level, but still have some variation in that. And then be able to look at social network analysis and spatial analysis to really help them be able to then identify linkages within the individuals and within places. So there's lots of different types of lists or criteria, other criteria out there. I just cited one here. There's different types, but we didn't use those here because that information wasn't readily available to us. For example, criminal histories isn't necessarily something that was in that database or could be easily incorporated or used. And gang affiliation, for example, which Fox, Allen, and Toth use in theirs, wasn't information that we were told that was like that was really like collected in a way that would be used as something that could be reliable. So if we use that as a criteria, we were told that, you know, sometimes it's good information, sometimes it's not, we don't really know. So we couldn't really use that same sort of criteria. We were really trying to tailor it to what was available and then what could be useful, but also what was evidence-based. And so my example earlier, the court assessments weren't really useful because while the risk assessments are there, they're not really comprehensive, nor do they have a lot of statistical variation. So to develop this, we spent a lot of time, like I said, talking with the crime strategies unit, getting an understanding of the data that they have, what would be a manageable number, going back and forth of getting a really good understanding of what they have and how they use it. We worked with quite a few subject matter experts in this, reaching out to different researchers and academics in this space, as well as practitioners, the literature, and assessing the database. And from that, we looked at the incidents and we sought to then identify those individuals. And from that, we found that we found 39% of the individuals from the incident database were named suspects. And of those, 6% were connected to 3+ incidents within that short period of time that they had been collecting that data, which gave us a number of, which gave us, 726 incidents and 223 individuals. So our first criteria for this prolific offender as part of our list was being named a named suspect in 3+ incidents in this database. So here's the remaining criteria or assigning based upon a sort of threat level. So the first would be being named in 3 or more incidents within the database. And then having a firearm at all associated with the incident would be 1. And then you can kind of see the threat level go up from that. So did you have a firearm? Because again, the focus of the unit is really on firearms. Did you have a firearm? What did you do with the firearm? Did you threaten it? Did you, if you're increasing the threat level, did you fire it? Did you use it as a threat? And then the fourth and highest one was like, were there multiple suspects at the incident trying to capture the aspect of having, larger individuals who are committing crimes in groups? And then having multiple suspects and multiple firearms would be sort of the highest level. But as part of this, it wouldn't necessarily mean like that, if you were at the highest threat level, that you wouldn't necessarily also be looking at someone who was at a threat level 1. You could just sort of say like, here's ways of looking at this data based upon a sort of way of coming up with a threat level or sort of way of coding this and way of looking at what the research suggests are risk factors for being a prolific offender. And then we assign then a threat level, not necessarily a point or scoring system, because we didn't have really good data to suggest that, is a 2, is a threat level 2 substantively different than a 3, and by how much? And are those points substantively different? What's the cutoff level? We didn't have data on that. So instead, it's really just like, like threat level, but not necessarily a point system. So from all of those, from the ones that were named more than 3+ times, in that period of time, we came up with, there was a list of 223 named suspects that were associated with 3+ incidents. Out of a total of 11,175 named suspects. So you can see that we really were able to narrow down to those that had, were named suspects quite a bit. And then of those, you can see there the threat level, you're getting very small after that. Then those that had firearms, with those 192, and then 88 had firearms, multiple suspects, and then 17 were at the highest level of multiple suspects and multiple firearms involved. So the very small number from that very large list of incidents. We'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. So let's describe a little bit about these 223 individuals and the 726 violent crimes that they were associated with. So what kinds of weapons were they using? Not surprisingly, almost over half of them, they were using a firearm. In 45% of them, the firearm was present but not discharged. And then you can see 22% of them had the firearm charge was carrying a concealed or having weapons under disability. But Ohio's a recent change in the law would have made those not necessarily crimes in Ohio now, so that may make a change in charging now compared to when the data were being collected. And then 30, but I mean, still a third of these individuals were connected to incidents where the firearm was actually being discharged at a person or thing or in the air. So still a very high threat level if a third of these where the firearm is actually being discharged. And then you can see the other types of crime types associated with these individuals associated with these incidents. The suspects, half of them are 25 to 40. Over a third were 18 to 24. So not surprisingly, very much in that age crime curve. Of being, fairly young. And then most of them, those multiple incidents were occurring within a very short period of time, within 1 to 3 years, with, a quarter of them within 2 years, a little over a quarter of them within 3 years. So they're, those crimes are occurring within a short period of time. So then if you look at, of the 726 incidents, 15% of those had multiple suspects. And then of those that had that, multiple suspects and multiple firearms were 15%. So that's where we get the 17. And that's the very highest threat level. Of those with multiple suspects, they were younger. And those that had multiple suspects and multiple firearms, they were statistically more likely to be younger suspects as well. So the younger suspects were more often associated with being associated with incidents where there were multiple suspects and where there were multiple suspects and multiple firearms. We tried to, we worked to statistically understand if our criteria were working in the ways that we expected it to see if this criteria functioned as it should. It mostly did. But I'll talk about some interesting things that we did find. If it was functioning in the way that it was supposed to, we should be seeing differences in those that were in our, 3+ incident group, meaning they were associated with 3 or more incidents, than those that were not in that. group. Okay, they should be more violent in other ways. They should be associated with more violent. They should be associated with more firearms. They should be, you know, they should be associated with these, with have more weapons and different types of things. And so we wanted to kind of compare how these would look. And we did see that they were more likely associated with multiple firearms, with firearms in general. They were more often associated with carjackings, commercial robberies, shootings into habitation, street or delivery robberies. So in other words, more serious crimes and more likely associated with weapons, as compared to those that just were a named suspect in one incident. The same for multiple suspects. We did not find any differences between the multiple suspects and any of the groups, but we did find differences in age, which is what we should expect with those associated with the that were named suspect in multiple incidents. So in other words, we did find some statistical support for our criteria. So they were reliable. It was measuring what we thought it was measuring. However, what we really found was that the cutoff point for these data could have also really been 2+ incidents, not necessarily 3+ incidents, because we actually found very little difference between the two and being a named suspect in 2 incidents and being a named suspect in 3+ incidents. The difference is really just a matter of how, you know, how much can you tackle in terms of being in the top offender group. So we actually found that there weren't that many statistical differences between those groups. So if the crime, our suggestion to the crime strategies unit was, if you were able to, you know, be able to look at a larger prolific offender group, then you might want to expand it out to just looking at 2 people, being a named suspect in 2, not just 3. If that was something that you were able to do. But if you were really trying to get the top, the 3 group would still be statistically valid. And I think it also kind of gets at some of the idea that within this short period of time, again, being a named suspect would be important. But again, we were giving this information for them to use in a very applied way, so that they weren't necessarily saying, okay, if they were in a 3, then they had to be in this and we were somehow going after them, but instead being able to look at them for charging decisions. So giving them the flexibility to say, okay, well, this person's a named suspect 2 times, but they have these other risk factors, so that they could still understand the context of how to use the criteria. We also helped them understand the place and understanding where these offenses were occurring. So here's a map of Cleveland with the neighborhoods overlaid on it. And so if we looked at the top 5 neighborhoods, here we've labeled by name, top 5 being, you know, those that have the offenders, I mean, that by neighborhood in terms of the top 5 for crimes in Cleveland, which are Glenville, Central, Broadway, Slavic Village, Mount Pleasant, and the Union Miles Park neighborhood. And then we overlaid the prolific offenders by neighborhood on here. So of those 223, how many of the prolific offenders have addresses in those neighborhoods, in those high-risk neighborhoods? And so here are those where you can see the top 2 are Glenville and Central. So here you've added in this person-based and a place-based approach to looking at the data. And then we did a deeper dive into 2 of them, which were Glenville and Central, because those were the top 2. So by looking at where the suspects live in relation to the crimes that they commit, you can get a better understanding of policing, investigative, and intelligence efforts. For example, you can see the average distance traveled per incident and what kinds of incidents are they most often associated with. So you can see that the most frequent crime committed in Glenville was shootings, with an average distance of 2.5 miles. And for the prolific offenders. And then if you look, for example, in Central, they're traveling less distances, and also was not shootings, but was physical assault. So again, different types of crimes and less distance that they were traveling. If you map this, you can then see in a very visual way why you're probably getting these differences, at least in terms of distance. So Central, as the name suggests, is centrally located in Cleveland. And so the need to travel to different places is probably different, but you can actually see where they're traveling to is actually different. So like if you're in Glenville, you're not as likely to go to the west side or other areas in the same way that if you to commit crimes as you are if you are in for example an offender who is based in Glenville. So just getting a sense of where the offenders are from and where they're traveling to and from gives you a sense of the types of crimes that they're doing and you know, where they might be moving and the distance to crime. And then giving a count, Glenville did experience much higher numbers of violent crime, although Glenville does have about 2 times the population of Central. So these are preliminary, but gives you a really good sense of here's all this information that they do have already in their database. So digging into the information, not just on the offenders, but on the location data gives you a sense of like, they're not just individuals, but they're individuals nested within neighborhoods. And so how those individuals are committing crimes within the neighborhoods makes a difference in terms of a response to those individuals. I think this was probably one of the most interesting parts of all of this was really being able to see the social network of how the most prolific offenders were socially connected to each other. So, given criminological theory, we knew that the criminological theory would suggest that especially the highly prolific offenders, they should be socially networked. They should be connected to individuals, to each other, especially if they're being named multiple times. And so we wanted to test the extent to which that was the case. And so this is, so we just mapped this out in a very, you know, visual sort of way to see how this worked. So here's one person who was a Allison. Here's an example. Allison's not the person's real name. The identities have been changed. So Allison was a prolific offender and is a named suspect in 3 incidents. So a suspect in 3 incidents. You can see, you know, suspect. You can see there's a suspect in 3. So Allison made the list because she was you know, a suspect in 3 incidents. That's how she made the first cut. However, if you actually looked at all the other crimes, she was a suspect in 3, but she was actually associated with several other crimes, just not as a suspect. So she was a victim in 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, a witness in another, and a reporting person in another one. So just by looking at suspects, which was important because we were wanting to look at suspects, but you're missing out on the other connections that these individuals might have. So while they're a suspect in several, you also want to look at how are they named elsewhere? Are they victims? Are they reporting? Are they witnesses? And so here's an example of this. So we wanted to see, okay, here are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. here are the 8 incidents that Allison is named in this short period of time, just in this database. How is she connected to these 8 incidents within this from 2017 to 2020? So within 3 years in these incidents, how are she connected to these? What you actually find is that Allison is highly connected to everyone. Both of her sons are actually also prolific offenders. And you can see just by following the social network here that like, for example, and by reading the narratives, that Alan is Allison's son. And she also has another son who is also a prolific offender who's appearing multiple times. So as you can see, Anton appears multiple times, Beth appears multiple times, Alan appears multiple times. So these folks are highly connected, and they all sort of know each other and are appearing, in these incidents as either victims, witnesses, reporting persons, or suspects. And so by just looking at suspects, you're also missing and just by looking at place, those are great, but then you're missing this bigger component, which is how do they know each other? And in this case, this network is highly complicated and dense, and it's just a visualization of how the data worked out just with this one individual in this incident, and how many other victims and witnesses are associated and networked with these individuals. So the prolific offenders, especially under the highest threat level incident, for example, Allison was using firearms and strolling network with Allison and Beth. And then when you look, they're actually related, but they've both been involved with multiple incidents of other family members. And so you're really then getting potential linkages to individuals across different crime scenes, and getting more of that nice, rich qualitative data of who they are and how they're connected to the crimes. So we also did help them, and Ryan can talk more about the social network analysis and how they've been able to automate some of that. But I would strongly recommend being able to automate and look at the ways and especially with these kind of data, ways in which people are connected with each other, because you're really being able to get a much better sense of not just suspects, but suspects and persons and places, and how they're all connected, gives much greater information about how to triage cases, how to link cases, and how to really understand who are the most prolific offenders. Ryan was nice enough because of his access to being able to look up things. Who are the prolific offenders and what has happened to them now? And I think this also sort of speaks to, sadly, to a good degree, to which while we don't have a comparison sample here, if we were correct in being able to say that these were highly prolific individuals, then we would suggest probably these individuals would have had negative criminal justice outcomes, or maybe have negative criminal justice outcomes. And for the 223 individuals, 2.5 years post-observation, after they made the list, you can see what has happened with these individuals, which I think is really, really heartbreaking. And especially for the youngest group, so those that were 24 and under at the time of the observation, 60% of them have been killed in a homicide, or in prison, or under parole or probation. So they're under some sort of criminal justice supervision. You can see that 6 of them have been convicted of a homicide. 5 of them are on parole or judicial release. These are the youngest ones. 4 of them are deceased, killed in a homicide. And overall, though, you can see that over half of them have been killed or under supervision. And so sadly, I think these were the most prolific offenders, or at least close to, but I think also speaks to the need for earlier intervention and earlier work with many of these individuals because they are at such a high risk.
Yeah, so when we finally had, the list of the 223 that Rachel had provided to us, I was like, let's look at some of these and come up with some of these numbers. So at first I just had that first column there, what had come to all of them, and those numbers are surprising enough. And then on a grand call with Beth and Rachel, we were talking about it, and I kind of started sorting through the list just even on the call, and I noticed that stark contrast when you got to the above 30 and over 30. So I said, let me put that together. And then, looking at it again, 24 and under, that's the 30 is where you can see the difference in being charged with a homicide. Of the 15, almost all of them are under the age of 30. And then when you get to being the victim of a homicide, almost all of them are under the age of 24 at the time of this. So those numbers, it was just looking at the data, it was very clear to me that age was going to play a huge part in this. And that's one of the really interesting things that comes out of this. I think we've got some people that work in the community and stuff on this call as well. And no matter what you think the best route of attacking the violent crime problem is in any jurisdiction, this data is very interesting in showing that it's this group that was put together this way of people with 3 incidents, firearms, etc. But really this group of the 3 incidents under 24 are the people that are going to be most at risk for and under 30 for committing homicides and being victims of homicide. So these are really the groups, no matter how you're going about your intervention efforts, that's the group you really want to target. I know a lot of people kind of know that to begin with, just anecdotally, but to see it in these stark numbers, I think was surprising even to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this doesn't take into account those that have been victims of non-fatal shootings or other sorts of things. And so I think this only gets at one aspect of negative outcomes, but really does again speak to the desperate need to be able to identify these individuals and to intervene as quickly as possible, especially with the youngest group. And again, I would remind you, like, the people who made our list, like, it wasn't based on criminal history. It wasn't based on their past. It wasn't based on these other things. It was in this very short period of time, what kind of incidents were they, associated with within this short period of time. And even from that data, at a very high level, you can see these very, very sad outcomes for them. Having said that, the prolific, the limitations are that they are based on identified suspects. So if the suspects, and especially in shootings, when there hasn't been an identified suspect, we wouldn't know how to, if they weren't identified, we didn't know who they were, so we wouldn't know how to put them on a list for a name for a person. So that's certainly a limitation of the data, and they may have been identified later as a named suspect, and we wouldn't have known that from this. And then the other limitation was that the original platform was for this was not ideal. As Brian mentioned, it was an access database, but with additional IPS funds from an additional grant, they now have a very fancy SQL server that they are very proud of, that really allows for visualization in real time, that allows other criminal justice partners to have access to that. And like I said, they have ways to visualize social networks within their data as well, so that they can see how people are connected. Not just here's the incident, but like how are they connected to people and guns and places and other sorts of things, which is just really very, very cool. We do have a full report of this. If you would like it, you're welcome to email me or Ryan, and we're happy to provide the full report of this that has more detail if you want. So as my last follow-up, here is a couple of questions for you, or one question for you about if you can sort of give some key takeaways you have from this webinar. Oh, maybe I have to start it. Oh, that's nice.
I'll take both of those all day. I'll say too, while we're waiting for these great responses to roll in, and the IPS grant has been great. We were awarded the IPS 19 as well as IPS 20. I know sometimes, depending on what DOJ grants you're looking at, some of them require a research partner, some of them don't. I would just highly encourage anyone, whether or not it's required or not, to find a research partner in your area that's going to assist. Rachel's been a great partner with our office for a lot of years now. I know there can be sometimes a thought between sometimes law enforcement and academics that nobody can get along. It's like oil and water or something like that. That's certainly not been my experience. If that's been anyone's experience, then find a researcher that you're comfortable working with, because they certainly are out there, and it's really able to give a lot more results to what you're working on. So sometimes you can, if you find yourself floundering with one of these grants, having that research partner, I think, is so key to being successful.
So, I mean, this is just so fantastic, and so I love all these words, you know, informative, yes, and data, and you all do rock. So, it's great, and we have one question for you in the Q&A, and for other folks, I'm sure and don't be afraid if you have not started down this road of data analysis in your prosecutor's office or in a law enforcement agency. Feel free to ask what you would be fearful is an elementary question. Go for it, because everybody started somewhere. So
Yeah,
can
absolutely.
you see the Q&A, Rachel and Ryan?
So we had a question from Terry about the list, how it's being used. So we're not currently using the list. It's been mostly for research at this point. There's some barriers that we encounter in our jurisdiction, and that's we're looking at incident data from Cleveland. It's not for the entire county. We're prosecuting people throughout the entire county. So persons who have committed more crime or are populated in Cleveland are going to be much more likely to pull up on the list that we currently have. So one of the things we've been hoping this whole time is to get, really those crime summaries from the county-wide system, which we've just barriers we've been unable to break down at this point, just because we have so many different agencies. But we're still hoping one day to be able to incorporate data from the entire county into our incident database.
And do we have some more questions too for you?
Go ahead.
In terms of employing social network, yeah, Ryan's office is using social network. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so from the database and from this grant project, we did have someone working as a reporting analyst. We borrowed a lot from some of the stuff that Nashville has done, and we have been able to generate some social network analysis out of this this report summary, the incident data, which has been helpful. We've just really gotten that off the ground in the last few months. Again, it's just located primarily with Cleveland data. We're really hoping with our case management system, we'll be able to broaden that for some of the more data that our office has. But it really, took a little bit to work at it, and then we sort of had a breakthrough with some of the structure, and we are able to, put in someone's name if they're in this incident database, and it is able to generate that that social network analysis, which has been useful for us just in seeing sometimes the connections between persons.
And I think you have another question. And this may be open to the group. Does anyone know any hidden gems inside PBK, which is prosecution by carpel, a case management system, as far as data analysis goes? And I know, Ryan, you use a different case management system, so.
Correct. We use Matrix. We had been using the older version of it, Justice Matters. It just flipped over to Matrix, so we've had some challenges with some of the way we're using data because of that in the last few months. But we're really hopeful that we'll be able to really roll this out even more when we're fully on board with the transition to Matrix 3. So we do not use PBK. So I don't have any hidden gems, but I don't know if anyone else in the chat can answer Matt's question.
Yeah, if anybody who's on does use PBK and you've been able to do data analysis through that case management system, feel free to chime in. Several people have asked, you will get not only have the recording of the webinar available, but you will get a PDF of all the PowerPoint slides. And I think you were also asked, is there a maybe a link or just could tell us, Rachel, and the article publication that was related to the research that you've done here.
Yeah, so we have a research brief from this that we're happy to share, and I can share that. And we are working on a publication for a journal for a special issue that's not out yet, but so I can't share that because it's not still in the works, but I'm happy to share the research brief. The publication would be peer reviewed, but this one is not yet peer reviewed, which probably means that you can actually read it. And happy to share that as well. Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you knew what PBK was because I didn't know. I was like, I have no idea what that question was.
I've been working with a lot of offices on their case management systems. So
Okay.
I did know that. And please note, we'd love you to do an evaluation. C. Ross put the link in the chat. So if you could scroll up a little in the chat, and she just did it again. Thank you, C. It's the last item in the chat, just to click on the evaluation and do that. And I think Terry, you also had a question. Probably Terry works with Cleveland Police Department on the public safety partnership. So I think you have there's a question there for you, Ryan. Oof. Did we lose it?
Didn't see it. Oh.
As for the one, and again, it has to do with the list. And again, it's the research list. I didn't even have until we unblinded it for me to look at the results and track those persons down. It wasn't being actively used by anyone. It was again research from some of the stuff that Rachel and her team were helping us do with our database. But again, I think the concept is there. There's some struggles that we have with, again, just the shape of our county and the data that we have. But it was, again, when I saw the results of that and how it showed what was happening to those populations, it was I think informative of some just broader decisions and stuff that are made within the criminal justice system. But it's not a list that we where I've got a whiteboard of names or anything like that.
Yeah, and I think actually, I think some of the, or at least the way that we had sort of envisioned or sort of thought, you certainly could, but like, I think community partners could use it this way, prosecutors could use it this way, police could use it this way, where even if it doesn't necessarily make a list or a person, I mean, certainly you could use it for that, but lists kind of is could go down a path that maybe isn't as useful. But if you are sort of making it, you have a case in front of you and you don't necessarily just want to base on someone's criminal history, you can just look at the incident and sort of say, like, okay, what are certain set of criteria that are evidence-based that make someone's incident more serious for me to look at? Like, and so you could say, okay, well, are they, have they been in here multiple times? Have they been a name? Are they appearing multiple times within a short period of time in an incident? And so most in law enforcement, or if you're a community partner, you could ask that or see that or have information on that. Like, are they committing crimes in a short period of time? Do they have weapons? Are they getting caught with weapons? Are they shooting weapons? Are they pointing it at someone? Are they, discharging that weapon? Are they doing that multiple times? Are they harming people? Are they involved with multiple people? So just these kind of series of questions could help you understand, in practical purposes, like, hey, here's this person who maybe, is not as serious, or, and can go to diversion or go to other things, versus here's this person who might need more of our attention, more intervention, maybe more resources from the criminal justice system because they are a prolific offender. And if we don't intervene, they could end up, deceased or behind bars for the rest of their lives. So I think, this sort of general set of criteria should probably work in most situations or instances. We wanted it to kind of work in that general sense for a variety of purposes.
And this was another question, I think probably directed to both of you.
Yeah, I think the list now is, because it's 2001, would be outdated because of, the individuals would be outdated. But the criteria, I think, is the most important part of it. The list was because it wasn't really a list, it was a way to set up criteria. So that criteria list, I think, certainly, and I am working with several community violence interruption from CVI grants with individuals in Cleveland as well. So I have been in conversations with them about how to potentially incorporate or use some of that information in the work that they're doing in a very different way. But again, I think the same criteria, but how they could be able to use that in a for intervention in a non-criminal justice sort of way, but to
I would
have
just
them have an understanding of that.
And I would just say too, the methodology that Rachel used supports the idea that I think the community would know, I mean, who these persons are. They're appearing as a named suspect in an initial incident because someone in the community knew that person's name. And, more than likely they're giving that name to law enforcement because this person, it's probably not the first time the person did that. Sometimes they're finally fed up with somebody. So it just goes to that idea that the persons in the community are the people that are going to know some of these names, and you can see the results when people are known and they're named suspects in multiple reports. What happens? So even without looking at it in that list way, I think it supports the idea that dealing with the community and speaking with them the names that you're getting or the persons are probably going to be that are most at risk for the poor results that are in the group from Rachel's research.
And it seems, in this, looking at new ways to collaborate to address violence in neighborhoods, that by having a valid criteria and then from that doing the social network analysis, I think even the sharing of the social network analysis with, community violence interveners, just seeing that would be helpful inform their work. I mean, it's a way that this work can keep evolving.
Mhm.
Great. Any more questions? If you could just click, do the evaluation. The link is in the chat. And I, want to thank Rachel and Ryan so much. They've worked so hard over the last several years on this project, and this has been the culmination of all their work. Really, it's just had such great results, and then just opened so many more avenues for prosecutors, law enforcement, and community workers. So I really appreciate all that you've done.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Beth.
Thanks for having us, hosting it.
All right, thanks everybody, and I think we're good. Yes, well done is correct in our last chat.